Hello everyone, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me well. If so, please let me know in the chat. Okay, but again, this is a good opportunity to welcome everyone to this afternoon class where we will be studying this week's Torah portion. Ariel Karavelnikov, good to see you there, my friend. All good, says Rocky Polak. That's great. Judy, hello Judy. Good to see you there. We'll give a couple of minutes for more people to join the class. We were running, actually it was kind of weird today because we had a funeral before the class and then I have to change the titles and then prepare the stream to go live for all of you, but everything is going well. So I'm so happy to have so many of you there. But again, remember, the chat is open. So if you want to send me any messages, I love to interact with my students, but for that you have to use the chat. By the way, if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to our channels. You see, you have to hit that little button on YouTube. And also if you're on Facebook, there is that thumbs up button that you have to hit. And that's all good. It's all good. Ariel, you said you cannot hear me. Really? Is there anybody else that cannot hear me? I see my meters moving here in my computer, so I'm never sure how it's going out. Let's see if I have my phone here. I'm never sure how it's going. Yep, it's working on my phone. So fine here, yeah. Ariel, you're on Facebook, so you probably have to open the video and click the like a little speaker thingy so you can activate the sound. Good, it's working. Okay, so today we are going to study Parashat Vayetze. This is the story of Jacob. You probably remember what happened last time, that Jacob tricked his brother Esau. Actually, he tricked him twice, remember? One was with a plate of lentils. He waited until Esau was very, very hungry. He was starving. So he said, okay, I can give you this food if you give me as payment the firstborn rights. That was trick number one. Basically, it was kind of an unfair deal. Because we have to understand, I don't know if we talked about this last time, we have to understand what is it when we say about the firstborn rights, how it worked back in the day. So basically it is, you have to imagine the entire assets of a person. And let's say that a person had 4 children. So the way it worked is the law of inheritance dictates that if you have 4 children, you have to divide your assets into 5 portions. Always one more portion than whatever children you might have. So if you have 5 children, you divide it into 6 equal portions. And then the firstborn will receive double from all the rest. So that was basically the big deal of this kind of a trick that Jacob did with Esau. So that was the financial thing. So basically, in that case, Isaac will divide all his assets into 3 and will give 2 to the firstborn and only 1 to the other one. So technically it should be double for Esau, who was the firstborn, and 1 portion for Jacob. But Jacob tricked him. So basically after that transaction, now Jacob will receive double of the money. And the second one was when Isaac was very old. He felt that he might die at any time, so he wanted to give a special blessing to the children. Blessings are something very important. Even in these days, I believe that we don't pay enough attention to our power to bless other people. Blessings could be one of the most powerful tools we have to make a difference with our speech. When you say to somebody, for example, you are valuable, you are special, you are talented, you are great, you are awesome. That is a blessing. You are actually making a difference, making an actual change on the other person with your words. In Judaism, words are extremely powerful, and we believe that words, the power of speech, can change worlds. Well, sometimes literally, because we see that the entire world where we live, according to the Torah, was created by God's speech. God said, "Let it be light," and there was light, and so forth. It didn't say God thought, "Let it be light." God said, "Let it be light." So in other words, the power of a blessing using your speech is very important. It's just that sometimes we think great thing about other people, but we don't say it out loud. They just stayed with us, and it won't make any impact. It won't make any change. You have to be able to say it. Say it out loud. You are special. You are valuable, and so forth. So the blessing from a father to a son was something very important. Now it looks like Isaac had this special blessing to give also to Esau, that implied that Esau will be the one empowered through speech to be the continuation of the legacy of Abraham. Remember, Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac had 2 kids. So basically, Abraham made Isaac his how can I say it? Abraham put into Isaac the responsibility to continue with all the wonderful ideas that Abraham brought into this world. Okay, so basically Isaac received this blessing from Abraham. And now Isaac has to bless one of the kids to continue with that legacy. It looks like everything was going to Esau. But it's very interesting because the Torah said that Isaac couldn't see well. Perhaps it's implying that he didn't realize that Esau wasn't the right one to receive that blessing because he was not the one who cared about Abraham's legacy. In fact, the Torah will describe very specifically Esau and Jacob, saying that Esau was a hunter, but Jacob was the one who would stay at home. And the Rabbi said that stay at home means stay at home studying all the teachings of Abraham. So Esau wasn't able to see it, but Rebekah, Isaac's wife, she saw it. And she said, this is not right. So she kind of helped Jacob to trick Esau one more time. So Jacob dressed like Esau and went to see the father, and he received the special blessing. So in other words, at the end of the day, Jacob received double portion and also received the blessing of that implies that he will be the one continuing with the legacy of Abraham. As you can imagine, Esau wasn't happy about this, even though he didn't understand maybe what continuing with the legacy of Abraham implied. Doesn't matter. All what he knew is that he was tricked twice, but this guy. So now, in this week's Parasha, Jacob receives a very interesting piece of advice from Isaac, his father, saying, I think it would be a good idea if you leave the house and you go somewhere else, otherwise your brother might end up killing you. So, well, that's how we come into this week's Parasha, and let's see what happened. At the very beginning, the opening phrase goes like this. Let me go here. Here you are. So we'll say that Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheba vayelech Harana. And Jacob departed from Beersheba, where he was living, and he went towards Haran, who was basically another place where they have relatives living there. Remember that their mother, Rebecca, came from that same place. So in other words, he decided to go to visit relatives far away from home, far away from his brother. Now, the rabbis are kind of curious about this first verse of the Parasha, what it says, Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheba vayelech Harana, because basically that was already said at the end of the previous Parasha. We already knew that Jacob was going there. So the rabbis are asking, why the repetition? You see, let me bring it back a little bit. The end of the previous Parasha. And before I read this, let me read what happened in here. We have Mary Nazen. Hello, Mary. Welcome. And Shelley Jochino said, family dynamics, brotherly love. Yeah, sort of. And Ariel Karabelnikov, thank you for your comment. So, you see, in Genesis 28:5, which is the end of the previous Parsha, we'll say, Vayishlach Yitzchak et Yaakov vayelech Padena Aram, Lavan Betuel Arami, Achi Rivka, Em Yaakov Esav. So Isaac sent Jacob off, and he traveled to Padam Aram, to Laban, son of Bethuel the Aramean, and brother of Rebekah, Jacob and Esau's mother. So we already knew that there was no need for the repetition that actually Jacob went there. But nevertheless, we have this repetition. So I have a question for you here, and is, as we can see, Genesis 28:10 cannot simply be informing us that Jacob set out on his journey to Laban's house. For this fact has been stated 5 verses before. So this is what I did for you for this class. I went to the Midrash. More specifically, most of the texts are going to come from Midrash Rabbah, because the Midrash presents a number of expositions that derive additional layers of meaning from our verse. And again, this is fascinating because the rabbis are puzzled that the Torah actually repeats that thing that Jacob left, because he was already said it at the end of the last Parsha. Jerome Fomin, you say, perhaps he sent him off as a punishment for deceiving him. No, I think it's more in the neighborhood of Rocky Pollack. It's saying tough love. There was something that perhaps by going there, Jacob would learn. He needed to learn the lesson. But I don't think it was necessarily a punishment, although it could be. But it was double-sided. There were 2 layers. One was to protect Jacob's life, but another, at the same time, maybe he will learn something at the house of Laban. I think Isaac knew who Laban was. And Laban, we are going to learn from this Parsha, also was a trickster. So in other words, this Parsha could be called trickster tricked. That will be one name that we could put to this Parsha, because Jacob is going to be tricked by Laban, and he's going to feel on his own flesh, right, what it is to be tricked that way. Laban is going to change on the spot deals that they were made on him, and will be tricking Jacob all the time. So I think he learned something there. He's going to learn. And there are other things that we learn also, that it looks like he was sent off there without any money, or something happened in between and he lost all the money. There are midrashim about that too. It's not part of this class, but you should know that the rabbis are also puzzled with the fact that he didn't get any money. When Eliezer went to the same place to find a wife for Isaac, remember the story? That he went with camels and presents and a lot of things, because that's the tradition. You need that money to give to your future wife's family as part of the wedding arrangements. But Jacob was there supposedly also to find a spouse, empty-handed, doesn't make any sense. Well, there are midrashim saying that actually he was robbed by Esau's children, but you can either look that on the internet, or maybe I will be teaching about that next year whenever we study this Parasha again. Jerome, you said karma. Yeah, pretty much. I guess that's the way we call it in these days, the karma. Okay, so let's go to the Midrash Rabbah to see what different rabbis think about this repetition of the verse. Let's start with chapter 68, where Rabbi Pinchas, in the name of Rabbi Huna Bar Papa, began his discourse on our verse with the following exposition. Then you will walk safely on your path, and your foot won't stumble. When you lie down, you won't be terrified. You will lie down, and your sleep will be pleasant. Then they explain. Then you will walk safely on your path. Aha! Even though this is from the book of Proverbs, according to the rabbis, is an allusion to Jacob. As it states, Jacob departed. When you lie down, you won't be terrified. This is an allusion also of Jacob from Esau and Laban. You will lie down and your sleep will be pleasant. It also refers to Jacob, of whom it states, and he lay down in that place. Remember, that is the story of the famous dream, with the ladder going to heaven, with angels going up and down. So, the rabbis on Midrash Rabbah are understanding that there are some parts of the Bible that they have a hidden connection to parts of the Torah. And when the rabbis say, for example, when the Proverbs is saying, then you will walk safely on your path and your foot won't stumble. When you lie down, you won't be terrified. You will lie down and your sleep will be pleasant. When that was said, when that was written, the author had Jacob in mind. And this is something that the author learned from Jacob. And so it was written in the book of Proverbs. So the rabbis are kind of, through the Midrash, bringing or reminding us of that connection between some of these verses and the Torah. Majid, shalom, welcome to our class. Okay, so that's what we learn from Midrash Rabbah. But of course, now we will have a rabbi making a comment on the Midrash that I want to share with you. It says, although the scripture states merely that Jacob departed, in truth, he was fleeing for his life, right? It's also interesting. Why would the Torah say that he departed? Wouldn't it be more accurate to say he ran away? But that's not the way it's written. It says departed. There are no mistakes in the Torah. Nothing is random. If you find something like this that is kind of weird, it means that there is some kind of hidden meaning, and it's up to us to try to understand that hidden connection. In this case, the Torah said departed and not running away for a reason. Let's keep reading. The Midrash teaches that even so, Jacob walks securely in the knowledge that God will not allow his enemy to harm him. Okay, so that's why he said departed. But yes, he was running away from his life because he was in danger. But the Torah says departed because the Torah is acknowledging the peace of mind that Jacob had at the time that he left his father's house. Even though in reality his life was in danger, his faith in God, his emunah, was so strong that running away wouldn't be appropriate. He departed because it's all about what he felt, it's all about his state of mind. He knew that wherever he will go, God will be with him, which is interesting because it seems that it wasn't 100% clear for him, because when he had this dream of the ladder connecting heaven with earth, when he wakes up, he said, Yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh v'anochi lo yadati. He said, God is even in this place, and I didn't know that. which seemed to imply that he had this strong faith in Isaac's home, but he wasn't 100% sure back then if God will be everywhere. For us, it's kind of obvious in these days, right, that God is everywhere. But perhaps back in the day, he heard the stories of Abraham and how God said, this is the promised land, this is the place where you have to go, I will be with you. Perhaps God is only there, but if I leave that place, God won't be with me in a different place. Those were the struggles at the end of the day that perhaps Jacob had on his mind. And that's why when he wakes up from the dream, far away from his home, he said, God was here. And I didn't know that until today. But now I know. Now I know, and I'm sure that wherever I go, God will be with me. But, according to the Midrash, at the time that he left his house, he did have that peace of mind, and that's why the Torah uses the word departed and not run away. Let's keep reading what Rabbi Hanoch Zandel ben Yosef have to say. Jacob was confident of divine protection against his enemies, and so had no cause for fear. When he had not even met his future father-in-law Laban, Jacob had heard enough about his deceitful reputation that there would have been grounds for apprehension. Right? Even though they didn't have internet back in the day, so you couldn't Google a person to know their what they do, or they've been in jail or whatever, they still have family gossip, right? Where they would talk about relatives, and chances are that he heard some of the stories about Laban from his mother. The Midrash indicates that when Jacob lay down to sleep on his way to Haran, God granted him a pleasant night's rest. This is quite the opposite of what we would expect. For those who are being pursued cannot afford to allow themselves to sleep. And even when they do, sleeping upon the hard ground with rocks as pillow, as Jacob did, is certainly not a pleasant sleep. But nevertheless, he was able to have a pleasant sleep because of his trust in God's plan. And this is something that perhaps we have to understand, that when we believe that there is, if you believe that God is in control of the universe, then basically emunah, faith, means to know that you are going through whatever is God's will. Whatever happens is God's will. And sometimes what happens is we don't understand it and we get upset. We cannot sleep because of that feeling of not understanding, that feeling of frustration. But the Torah seems to imply here that Jacob's total emunah, total faith in God's plan, allow him to have a good night sleep. Shelley, you said the sleep of the just. Yes. Yeah. But it's very difficult to be there. It's an extremely long journey to reach that place where we can have a good night's sleep, knowing that God has us on the palm of his hand. It's not something that happens overnight. It takes time to reach that spiritual place. It involves prayer, it involves studying, it involves wrestling with challenging ideas. But the promise is that if we engage in that process, we will eventually be there and develop that kind of set of mindset that would allow us to go through life knowing that even if we are going through difficult times, because it doesn't say that whatever Jacob was going through wasn't difficult, it wasn't challenging. It just says that regardless of how challenging it was, he was able to have a good night sleep. Shelley, you said, now indeed one must listen to your inner voice. Well, that's a problem. Sometimes the inner voice will tell you all the opposite. Sometimes your inner voice will tell you, you shouldn't be sleeping. How can you sleep with all the things you have in your life? Well, I believe that we have techniques in Judaism to kind of shush or silence sometimes that inner voice that it will try to block you. It's what we call the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination inside ourselves. And we have to find ways to keep it quiet or to develop another voice that speaks louder, that will allow us to keep moving forward with full trust in God. And it's interesting because when more challenges we have in our lives, it's when we need a good night's sleep the most. It's when we need to be on very aware of what's going on to find the right things to do. So this is very important sometimes, to develop that kind of mindset to allow us to have those good sleep nights whenever we need them the most. So let's continue. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman, this is also from Midrash Rabbah, and as you can see, one of the techniques of Midrash Rabbah is always to bring one verse from a different part of the Bible and then connect it with something that happened in the Torah. I love this technique that the rabbis used back then. So Rabbi Shmuel Bar, and also it's almost like they create some mystery at the beginning. They bring this seemingly out of context verse, and then they are going to connect it. So I guess it's a very good technique to keep the students or the listeners engaged. Because you say, where's the rabbi going with this? Why did he bring this seemingly random verse? Haha. Pay attention and you will know it soon. So that's the way Midrash Rabbah many times operates. So, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman began his discourse with the following exposition. A song to the ascents. I raise my eyes to the mountains. Where will my help come from? My help comes from God. Very famous verse from the book of Psalms. Shir LaMa'alot, Esa Enai Ele'arim, Me'ayin Yavo Ezri Me'im Adonai. There is a famous song, actually, about this. If you want to look for it on YouTube after the class, called Shir LaMa'alot, you probably can find it, because there are many versions of Shir LaMa'alot, but the one that goes, Shir LaMa'alot, Esa Enai Ele'arim, Me'ayin Yavo Ezri Me'im Hashem, and so forth. Beautiful, beautiful song if you can find it after. Okay, so this is the verse that Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman presented to the students, and now we are going to make the connection. This was spoken to Jacob, who meant, I raise my eyes to my mentors. This is very interesting, because here this rabbi is kind of changing the understanding, because the word El Hearim, same spelling, different vowels, because remember, in Hebrew, the vowels are the little dots that you can see in the words. So the word El Hearim, he is reading it El Hahorim. That means to my teachers and to my instructors in serving God. So Jacob continued, where my help come from, right? So in other words, it's implying that Jacob is not really looking at the mountains, it's not really looking up to heaven to ask where my help will come from. He's looking or searching or trying to tap and connect with the teaching of his teachers and mentors and asking them, or in other words, asking his brain containing all that information, the question, where is my help going to come from? And that brought the answer, the help will come from God. So basically, it's something that he always had inside himself. It was already taught to him that the help will come from God. The only thing is, sometimes you have to dig inside your knowledge, your wisdom, to remember what you were taught, that the help will come from God. Remember the Midrash that's saying that when we come to this world, we have an angel teaching us the entire Torah. But then when we are born into this world, the angel touches our lip, and then we forget the entire Torah. And I mentioned this before. The thing that we have in between the nose and the lip is the sign of the finger of the angel. So in other words, we already know the answers. We already have the entire Torah inside ourselves. The problem is we cannot tap into that information. So our teachers are the ones who are helping us to connect into that, are bringing the Torah back to life. So we are never learning Torah, we are remembering Torah. So in this case, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman is connecting the verse from Psalms with the Parasha, said, Esai enai leorim. I actually look up what my teachers taught me, all that Torah that they helped me remember. And then when I remember that, it's pretty clear that the Ezri Me'im Adonai, the help will come from God. Let's continue with Midrash Rabbah. It says, when Eliezer went to bring Rebekah as a wife for Isaac, what is written concerning him? Then the servant took 10 camels of his master's camels and set out with all the bounty of his master in his hand. But I have with me not a single nose ring or bracelet. So one of the things that Midrash is saying is, I also need God help, because I would like to find a fine wife in Haran, but I have no money. So God, I know that you are going to help me. I don't know how. In fact, that's one of the neat thing of faith. You don't have to figure it out how. You have to believe that it's going to happen. Because sometimes when you overthink the how, there we are blocking ourselves into looking at a wider and bigger picture. And it happens all the time. Sometimes when our ideal of what should happen is too narrow, then we may be missing an opportunity that is in front of us, but is slightly off from whatever we were going, and we miss it. And that is because our expectations sometimes are too narrow. We try to outsmart God, and we miss whatever God is sending our way. So this is an expression of faith of Jacob. But what he's saying is, I remember. I learned this from my teachers. They reminded me that it's in the Torah, that I don't have to figure it out how. In fact, I don't know how, but what I know is it's going to be a way where God is going to help me. And in fact, we know it took a few years. It took a few years. It wasn't overnight. But eventually, Jacob got married. And he had children. And he prospered there. But it wasn't overnight. He was strict. He had to work as a slave for a while. But eventually, he did it. Not only that, but whenever he did it, God changed his name from Jacob to Israel. So he wasn't Jacob anymore. He wasn't the trickster anymore. Now he was Israel. That comes from the word Yashar. So now he was Jacob the whole. Jacob the righteous person. So all those years not only brought him lots of blessing, but also taught him all the lessons he needed to learn to become a better person. And that happened because he didn't try to outsmart God. He actually trusted that God was holding his hand every step of the way. But take the time machine, go to see Jacob when he was tricked by Laban so many times. You will see, oh, poor guy, he's miserable. He will never be able to get anything good out of this. It's impossible. Nevertheless, eventually he did get something good out of it. Eventually he comes back home, and eventually he reconciled with his brother. What an amazing lesson for us whenever we are struggling, just to have faith and to keep moving forward, knowing that we don't have to figure out everything. It's not, we don't need to, if we trust that God will be there every step of the way. Sometimes the rabbis say, if we try to do everything, then God will say, you know what? Have it your way. You do it. But here is an invitation to say, trust me, keep moving forward and see what happens. It won't be overnight, but it will be there. Let's continue, because we also have another rabbinic interpretation of this Midrash Rabbah. So, Rabbi Hanok Zundel ben Yosef, again, he said, Jacob was on his way to find a wife and looked to the ways of Abraham and Isaac for guidance. When he did so, he recalled how Eliezer took many camels laden with his master's wealth to bestow upon the girl who will marry Isaac. Jacob, on the other hand, had nothing to his name and feared that his chances of finding a suitable partner were therefore hampered. So he calls out, where will my help come from? The word for help, Ezeri, is an allusion to a wife. For Eve was called Adam's helper or help, Ezer. Remember in Genesis it said Ezer Kenegdo, same word. Jacob was thus asking, without any money, how will I attract a wife? Oh, another beautiful interpretation of the verse that this rabbi is bringing. It's not only that basically according to this interpretation, when the Psalms say Me'ayin Yavo Ezri, he's not saying where is my help will come, but what he's saying is where my wife will come. I have no money. But then again, it's the same interpretation. Ezri, my wife, my helper, will come from God. God will find a way so you can find the right person to be with you. Any comments so far? So far, it's a very quiet chat, except now for Ariel Karabelnikov, that he liked the insightful point. Thank you very much. I will make a little stop so people can make their comments. So let's continue. More about the Parasha. Rabbi Abahu began his discourse on this passage, remember the first verse, the verse that I introduced at the beginning, this passage with the following verse. House and riches are an inheritance from one's ancestors, but a wise wife comes from God. And then the Midrash Rabbah said, sometimes a man goes to find his mate, and sometimes his mate comes to him. And remember, this is, of course, back in the day, everything was written from a male perspective, right? It sounds kind of weird today. We are living in a time where we are egalitarian, right? But you have to always have in mind the context of this text, and then you have to use analogy to realize that it's talking about men and women. So, in the case of Isaac, his mate came to him. And it states, Isaac went out to supplicate in the field towards the evening, and he raised his eyes and saw, and behold, camels were coming, etc. And Rebekah raised her eyes and saw Isaac. She inclined while upon the camel. Remember the story? Eliezer, Abraham's servant, went to bring a wife to Isaac. Isaac didn't have to do anything. She came to him. Jacob, on the other hand, went to find his mate. As is written, Jacob departed. In other words, he said, you never know. You never know. When you're looking for your soulmate, you never know how it's going to happen. Sometimes you make it happen. Sometimes when you less expect it, it happens. So let's continue. So Rabbi Shmuel Yafe Ashkenazi will say, through the example of Jacob, the Midrash demonstrates that even when a man seeks out a wife himself, apparently in control of his own destiny, this does not contradict the belief that marriage is divinely arranged. And this is something that is very interesting. The fact that the rabbis believe that marriage is a result of divine intervention. In other words, there is a divine purpose on us finding our, what we call the soulmate sometimes. That everything is divinely ordained. Which seems to be interesting, because otherwise if you believe that everything is divinely ordained, how can you explain divorces and abuse within the family? What's going on here? So the rabbis are also puzzled for that, and there is a tension about the theology of this kind of business of finding a partner. How can it be that if divinely ordained, but we know that sometimes it's a disaster? So what's going on here? So I want to bring for you a few rabbinic insights that they are dealing with that tension of the marriage, and how sometimes it's great, and we can see it, that a couple, they are very successful and they seems to be presenting a great partnership, and you can actually see how they supplement each other, and sometimes it's not, and the marriage doesn't work. In fact, the Judaism believes in divorce is actually part of the Torah. So let me present a few sources of rabbis talking about that. First one. This is from Midrash Rabbah. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Shimon began his discourse with the following verse: God settles the solitary into a family. Remember, once again, this is the strategy or the methodology of Midrash Rabbah. They open with something from the Bible. So, what is the verse that Rabbi Yehuda Bar Shimon is introducing? God settles the solitary into a family. And this is the explanation. This is brilliant. I love this one. Certain matron posed a question to Rabbi Yosef Bar Chalafta. She said to him, in how many days did the Holy One, blesses He, created His world? Rabbi Yosef said to her, in 6 days, as is written, for in 6 days God made the heaven and earth. Whereupon she said to him, well, with what is He occupied from that time until now? So God created the world in 6 days. Then what has God been doing since then? And Rabbi Yosef said to her, the Holy One, blessed is He, sits and make matches, declaring, the daughter of so-and-so is destined for so-and-so, the money of so-and-so is destined for so-and-so. She said to him, is this His craft? Ha! I can also do this. I have many slaves and many maidservants, and in a short time I can match them together. Who needs God, right? Rabbi Yosef said to her, although it seems easy in your eyes, know that it's as difficult before the Holy One, blesses He, as splitting the Red Sea. Rabbi Chalafta then left her presence. What did she do? She took 1,000 slaves and 1,000 maidservants and stood them in rows. She said, such and such slave will marry such and such maidservants, and such maidservants will marry such and such slave. And thus she matched them up in just one night. Hold on, typo. The following day, they all come to her. This one's head was cracked, and another leg was broken. She said to them, what happened to you? This maidservant said, I do not desire the slave. And that slave said, I do not desire that maidservant. Immediately she sent a message and brought Rabbi Yosef Bar Chalafta, and she said, there is no God like your God. Your Torah is true, both beautiful and praiseworthy, and indeed you have spoken well. So yeah, it's in other words, it is acknowledged that it's something extremely difficult to find the right partner, and perhaps it's something that we all fail sometimes, that we don't trust on God inside. or God's advice. Because the Torah is not short on advice, on what we have to look for whenever we look for a wife or a husband. The information is there, the advice is there, but sometimes we decide that we don't need it. So marriage breakdown means God is fallible? No, actually, I believe God has a good intention, in, like many other things in life. That sometimes we know what God wants, but we nevertheless decide to do whatever we want. Many of us maybe made that mistake in the past, that not basing our decisions, or our decisions weren't godly decisions. Let's put it that way. Yeah, the Torah has lots of advice on how to create a successful marriage. In fact, the Torah even have advice for single people, right? If you wanna, you have lots of good pickup lines in the Torah if you want. You see, if you want to meet somebody, you can approach the person and say, hey, I've been just studying the book of Numbers and I realize I don't have yours. You see, even good pickup lines coming from the Torah. But yeah, no, seriously, lots of good advice. In fact, there are many ways, or many good books actually written on how to apply the knowledge or wisdom of Torah to marriage, to have a successful marriage. So let's continue. Now, it says, although a man's ideal wife is selected for him at the time of his conception, his actions over the course of his lifetime determine whether he will marry her or not. If the man turns out to be worthy, then he marries the wife already chosen for him. But otherwise, God gives him his ideal spouse to a different man more worthy than he. Thus, the wife of so-and-so for so-and-so means that sometimes God matches the woman who was supposed to be the wife of one man with someone else. Very interesting. You see, this is what I mean. There is this tension among rabbis trying to understand or trying to make sense of the theology behind the match made in heaven. And this rabbi is bringing his own philosophy, of his own opinion. What do you think? Let me know in the chat. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this. Because at the end of the day, I don't think there is a right or wrong approach. There are opinions, and I would like to know your opinion on what you think. So let me know in the chat. Let's continue, and so let's continue with this, and let's go to the Talmud now. We are going to Masechet Sotah, and this is what it says. Resh Shmuel bar Rab Yitzchak stated, when Reish Lakish would open his lecture on the biblical passage of Sotah, you know what Sotah is? Basically it's in the Torah when a woman. When a man will suspect that his wife was cheating on him, he will take his wife to the temple and they will do this kind of hocus-pocus ritual that he has to drink a special potion, and if she was guilty, something will happen to her body, and blah, blah, blah. We don't have any written information that actually was done or was successful or actually worked. We don't know. It's kind of weird, but it's in the Torah. And it was discussed in the Talmud, that it's entire Masechet, entire tractate, to talk about that. So in this case, he said, when Reish Lakish, famous rabbi, will open his lecture on the biblical passage of Sotah, whenever the Torah is talking about this woman, he said thus, the heavenly court paired a woman to a man for marriage only in accordance with his deeds. It is stated, for the rod of wickedness shall not rest upon the lot of the righteous. But is it really so? Remember, this is the Talmud. And you should know this by now. Always in the Talmud, if somebody says A, you will have somebody else saying B. And somebody says B, somebody else will say C. So I love sometimes going to the Talmud because you will find many opinions of the same thing. So there was Reish Lakish. He said this. But then Rabbi Yehuda, it looks like he's not so fast. He said, Rabbi Yehuda has said in the name of Rav, 40 days before the formation of the embryo, a heavenly voice, something we call the bat call, issues forth and proclaims, the daughter of so-and-so is destined for so-and-so. This particular house is destined for so-and-so. This particular field is destined for so-and-so. From here we see that man's mate is predestined from the time of his conception, before it is known whether he will be righteous or wicked. How then can we say that man and woman are mated according to their deeds? This is not difficult. These notions that matches are determined at conception was stated concerning a first union. And this notion that one's mate is contingent on his conduct was stated concerning a second marriage or a second union. Very interesting, because basically what this rabbi is saying that is even though the match is made in heaven, we can still ruin it, and we can still do things wrong, and that is unfortunate, and unfortunately that match won't last. It will be broken, it will be a divorce. And then for a second union is something that is based on merits. It's another interpretation of the same concept. Let's continue. Now Rashi is going to bring his information. And since one's second marriage spouse is not predetermined at the time of conception, a second union is as difficult to achieve as the splitting of the Red Sea. So Rashi here is explaining that concept of the splitting of the Red Sea. But now, why this message of the... Hello, Zelda Elkin. Welcome to the class. So, why is this kind of business with the Red Sea? What is so? Why that image specifically? Well, we have the Maharal of Prague. Actually, he's going to bring his opinion on why specifically the rabbis are using that symbol. And he said, it is the nature of water to flow together. It cannot be made to stand rigidly apart. Conversely, a man and a woman who are not designated in heaven for one another are separate and distinct entities. Uniting these inherently disparate individuals in matrimony so that they could become one flesh is as difficult as sundering that which is essentially and inherently one. And according to this rabbi, that's why the Midrash uses the image of the Red Sea to talk about marriage. Any questions so far? Because I have only one more text for you. So let's do it, and then maybe we can wrap up talking. Rabbi Menachem Meiri, let me take this away. A first union is one which takes place when the couple is still young, and they are not yet subject to reward and punishment. Their marriage is ordained by heavenly decree. The marriage of older people is considered a second union, and it is determined by the parties' conduct. I believe this is also related to the fact that when this was written, the first marriage was prearranged. Most of the time, bride and groom had nothing to say about it. So it's and that's why it's easy to say it was predetermined, right? I guess it would be a way for this young groom and the young bride to convince them that whatever their parents picked for them, they should marry it. Because it was determined in heaven. So if I'm telling you, if I'm your father, I'm telling you that person is good for you, you should listen to me. So it was a fact. Back in the day, that was the way marriage were created. And even in these days, in more traditional circles, even though they get to know each other, and even though bride and groom now they have a little bit more room to say yes or no, they will still meet only people that they were screened in advance for them by someone else. So it also like it was another force involved trying to create this marriage. Yes, they will have the last word, the last saying, but after someone else picked the candidate for them. I don't know if you've ever been in Israel, for example, or some places in New York, if you go to certain hotels, and I saw it in Israel, in Jerusalem. I stay actually in the hotel, I think it was the Plaza, and sometimes the lounge, the lobby, was packed with these young couples that they were meeting there to get to know each other, and they were sent there by a matchmaker, a shadchante, as they say in Yiddish. And they were just sitting there, sipping, sometimes like Coca-Cola, and talking and getting to know each other, but with the knowledge that the person who is in front of them was picked by someone else. So now all the best they can do is to get to know the person. That's it. So, and the way it works is unless you find something really wrong in the other person, chances are you're going to end up in marriage. But the second marriage, when let's say that marriage doesn't work, most of the time the person will go and try to find somewhere else by themselves. There is no parents involved. So you can say that it involves your conduct. It's because you are doing all the job to make it work. Okay, so just try thinking. Yes, okay, Shelly. So you saw it, huh? Yeah. It was interesting because I really wanted to go there and to have maybe a meal or something, that there were no tables available, and I was thinking, I feel bad for the owners of the hotel that they're trying to make money, right, by running a restaurant, and then you have all the tables occupied by these couples that all they consume it's a bottle of Coke, or maybe they don't order anything, they just ask for a glass of water and they stay there for over an hour talking without eating anything. And hey, anyway, I ended up going usually to the bar and asking for some kind of snack or something there because all the tables were occupied. So thank you so much, everyone, for being there. And once again, please, I would like to remind you to subscribe to our channels. You have to click there and then click the bell, so you will be notified every time we go live or every time that we upload some kind of content to the net, to the internet, to our channels. So we don't want you to miss anything. So thank you again for participating in today's class. And yeah, and if God help, we'll be here next week at the same time, starting next week's Torah portion. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe and hope to see you soon. Bye now.